Hello and welcome to another Wilderco coronavirus tax reliefs and loan schemes update. Today you're joined by myself. I'm Chris Gent. I'm an audit partner at Wilderco. We also have with us Robert Bradman, who both is an audit partner at Wilderco and also heads up our accounting support division. And we're also joined by our head of tax, Tim Cook, to also ably assist us in covering off some of the topics we're going to be discussing. In brief, we're going to be covering off the job retention scheme. Rob will be discussing that, the business interruption loan scheme and Bounceback fund, which I'll be covering off. And Tim will be running through the future fund and funding for co-working businesses. And I think he might touch on the SEISS as well, if there's time. So firstly, I'll be handing over to my colleague, Robert Bradman, for the job retention scheme.
Thanks, Chris. So as Chris has mentioned today on this webinar, I'm going to cover the coronavirus job retention scheme. I will provide a brief recap on the scheme and an update based on latest developments. And I'll also just provide some initial feedback that we've received both from our payroll team, who have been working with many of our payroll clients on this scheme, and directly from some of our clients. So what I'll cover is the job retention scheme, what it means, a recap on what it means to be a furloughed employee, some updates since the scheme was launched, information on the HMRC portal, and as I mentioned, some latest announcements and client experiences. And I think a previous slide showed that one of the most common and probably popular schemes that has been announced by the government has been this job retention scheme. And latest figures announced this week have suggested that over 7.5 million workers have now been furloughed, so far costing £10.1 billion in claims. So let's start off just with a recap of what the coronavirus job retention scheme is. So on the 20th of March, the government announced measures to protect employers and employees under a new scheme called the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme. And it's designed to help employers whose operations have been severely affected by the coronavirus to enable them to retain their employees and hopefully to protect the UK economy as much as possible. And under the scheme, all UK employers are able to access support from the government to continue to pay part of their employees' salaries for those who otherwise may have been laid off during the period of this pandemic. Employers will be able to obtain a grant from the government to cover the lower of 80% of a furloughed employee's wages, up to a maximum of £2,500 per employee per month, plus the associated employer national insurance and the minimum auto enrolment employer pension contributions on that regular wage. An employer can also choose to top up an employee's salary beyond this grant amount, but it's not obliged to do so under the scheme. If I just move on now just to a recap on the meaning of a furloughed employee. So the initial HMRC guidance for employees stated that if your employer intends to access the coronavirus job retention scheme, they will discuss with you becoming classified as a furloughed worker, and that this would mean you're kept on your employer's payroll rather than being laid off. So in other words, effectively being put on leave of absence. And it's very important, I'll highlight again, that an employer cannot unilaterally place an employee on furlough unless it is permitted under the employment contract in place. Neither can the employer unilaterally reduce an employee's salary. Normal employment law considerations still apply, and employees will need consent to be put on furlough. And I'll cover a little bit more about that shortly in some updates. Decisions on furloughing can be taken on an individual by individual basis, and there's no requirement to apply the same conditions to every employee for the purpose of deciding which employees should be furloughed. However, when employers are making decisions in relation to who to furlough, equality and discrimination laws will apply in the usual way. And just to repeat, the minimum period that an employer can furlough an employee for is 3 consecutive weeks. And information and figures produced by the government on Tuesday suggested that so far, approximately 935,000 employers to date have furloughed some or all of their workers. So let's move on to some of the updates that have been announced since the scheme was first launched back on the 20th of March. And some of these were clarified by the Treasury's official framework of the scheme issued to HMRC since it was first introduced by the government, and subsequently by the Chancellor earlier this week with his announcements. So initially, the Chancellor extended the scheme from 3 months from the end of May to 4 up to the end of June. And then on Tuesday this week, announced a further extension of the scheme to the end of October. And I'll say a little bit more about this shortly. Since the scheme was first announced, the reference date for which employees are eligible to be put on furlough was changed from the 28th of February to the 19th of March. However, employers, and this is an important point, can only claim under the scheme for furloughed employees that were on the PAYE payroll on or before the 19th of March and which were notified to HMRC on a real-time information submission on or before 19th of March 2020. When a business changes owner, its employees very often are protected under the Transfer of Undertakings Protection of Employment Regulations, commonly known as TUPE. And where employees are employed by one employer on the 19th of March, but transferred to a new employer after that date, under the TUPE rules, they can be furloughed by the new employer. However, if an employee is transferred under the TUPE rules prior to the 19th of March, the new employer can only claim under the scheme if they themselves made an RTI submission for that employee by that date, 19th of March. Government guidance states that furloughed employees can engage in training as long as in undertaking this training, the employee doesn't provide services to or generate revenue for the employer. The Treasury's framework, however, has a narrower interpretation and provides that employees can only undertake their training that is directly relevant to their job. So it's a more narrow definition that has been clarified. Government guidance on how to furlough an employee states that there needs to be a written record, but the employee does not have to provide a written response. However, the Treasury rules say that an employee will only be furloughed if there is written agreement between the employer and the employee that they will stop working. Therefore, best advice and guidance is to obtain written agreement from the employee of their acceptance of being put on furlough. This agreement can be by email. So let's move on to a little bit of information and updates on the actual HMRC online portal, as this was only made available since we last gave an update on our last webinar. So the portal became available to accept grant claims from Monday the 20th of April, which was ahead of their initial deadline of the end of April for it being available. And despite concerns, the portal didn't crash in the initial couple of days, given the volume of claims made, and there was amongst the profession concern that this may happen, but thankfully proved to be unfounded. So if an employer wants their accountant to make the claim on its behalf, the accountant will need to be authorised for PAYE online by the employer. And if there's no authority in place, the employer should log into their own PAYE online account and enter the accountant's agent ID for PAYE services if they wish their accountant to submit the claim on their behalf. The accountant will then be able to do that, and subsequently the employer can use the same procedure if they wish to withdraw the authority once the claim has been submitted. When making a claim, the employer must include the national insurance number for each employee. HMRC has instructed that if the employer does not have a national insurance number for any employee who forms part of the claim, then the employer must contact HMRC to find a way of including that employee on the claim. Importantly, the employer must also provide HMRC with their UK bank account details, and the employer must make sure that the bank account provided can accept a BACS payment, which is the method by which the grant claims are being met. If an employer has less than 100 furloughed staff, then they'll be required to enter the details of each furloughed worker directly onto the scheme manually. The details will include their name, national insurance number, claim period and claim amount, as well as a payroll or employee number if that exists. Employers with more than 100 furloughed staff will be able to upload information directly onto the portal via a spreadsheet or CSV file. Importantly, records and calculations of the claim made for each furloughed worker needs to be retained by the employer, and these records must be retained for a period of at least 5 years from the time the claim is made. And HMRC have stated when the scheme was launched that claims are expected to be paid within 6 business days. And our client experiences, I'm pleased to report, support this to be the case. They do seem to be making payments relatively quickly out to businesses, which is pleasing to hear. Let's just move on just to some of the very latest announcements that were made by the Chancellor on Tuesday this week. So on Tuesday, the Chancellor announced an extension of the furlough scheme by a further 4 months until the end of October, with workers continuing to receive 80% of their current salary. From the start of August, furloughed workers will be able to return to work part-time, with employers being asked to pay a percentage towards the salaries of their furloughed staff. The employer payments will substitute the contribution the government is currently making, ensuring that staff continue to receive 80% of their salary up to the £2,500 per month limit. So important to stress that the scheme will continue in its current form until the end of July, and then changes to allow more flexibility will come in from the start of August. And that's an important point to stress. It will hopefully allow some employers to bring some of their employees back into the workforce on a part-time basis to start to move the economy forward, whilst at the same time allowing them to remain on the furlough scheme. The government have said that more specific details and information around its implementation from August onwards will be made available by the end of this month. So we await further news on that, and as soon as it becomes available, we'll be updating our clients on our website with our weekly update. So finally, if I just move on to some of the client experiences that we've encountered since the online portal became available. And our payroll department and some of our clients directly encouragingly have said that the portal is quite straightforward to use once all the details are available. And that was always the aim of the government. So it's good news from that point of view that it has been made relatively user-friendly. And apart from general details about the employer and the employee's name and their national insurance number, only 3 amounts will be required: the gross pay, employer's national insurance, and employer's pension contributions. And you won't be asked to enter totals per employee. We would recommend there is an HMRC calculator on the portal to validate the claim. It doesn't necessarily cover every scenario, although it does cover the majority of circumstances. And we would certainly recommend for any business that is submitting the claim directly themselves that they use this calculator to ensure that the claim that's being made is correct. For employers who provided RTI submission after the 19th of March, and this is mainly around director-only companies where maybe they only submit an annual payroll rather than a weekly or a monthly payroll, their claim is not being accepted if the submission was made after the 19th of March, despite previous RTIs being in the system. However, that doesn't mean to say that they're not eligible for the claim. It just needs to be resolved by speaking directly to HMRC to resolve this matter. And I know sometimes, given the volume of calls, it can be quite frustrating. Our experience has been when we've been speaking to HMRC directly on behalf of our clients, that we're getting a call back within 3 to 7 working days. And finally, I think the important final point to make is the quote that's on the screen. And we have had experience of this. The HMRC are randomly selecting employers and contacting them via telephone just to validate the claim, confirming the employer's details, PAYE reference details and such. They're not actually checking amounts, but they just want to make sure that it is a valid claim being made. So there are initial checks being made, and in the fullness of time, we fully expect there to be more detailed checks, which goes back to the important point about making sure that records are maintained. So I hope that that's been useful, both in terms of a brief recap of the scheme, providing an update, including what was announced by the Chancellor earlier on this week, and giving some initial feedback and experiences that we've had both by our payroll department that have been working so hard on behalf of some of our payroll clients, and the clients that have been dealing with the scheme directly themselves. We've thankfully been able to support all of our payroll clients that have been furloughing employees, both in terms of calculating the grants that are available to them and making the submissions, and we will continue to do that whilst the scheme remains open. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert. That's very helpful. I'm going to now cover over the Business Interruption Loan Scheme and also the Bounceback Loan Scheme. And I'm going to focus mainly on the comparison between the two rather than labour all of the facets of each. But as a recap, the Coronavirus Business Large Business Interruption Loan Scheme has been out now for somewhat over a month. Can we go to the next slide? It was launched on 20th of April, and it's available for companies to gain quite large amounts of relief. Eligible turnover is over 45 million, eligible up to 25 million of finance. If it's more than 250 million, you can borrow up to 50 million. The repayment terms can go on from anywhere between 3 months to 3 years. The eligibility criteria are, however, checked by the banks. There is a significant amount of administrative burden in applying for either the large business scheme or the business interruption loan scheme itself. Next slide. Okay. So there are eligibility criteria on both the large scheme and the business interruption loan scheme itself, which is not the large one. Sometimes there were in the past personal guarantees requested for the smaller facilities. Those got taken away. There can be personal guarantees requested on the large scheme for facilities over 250,000. Any sector can apply, as it states there. Now, the new boy on the block, the Bounceback loan scheme, is far more targeted towards the smaller companies, the private businesses. Although it does have a strict limit of £50,000 as a maximum, and it's also restricted to 25%. 25% of turnover. So there are restrictions, but it's far quicker to get access to the Bounceback loan scheme. It's 100% guaranteed by the government. There's no fees or interest in the first 12 months. No repayment at all in the first 12 months required. The online application is, I'm hearing from clients who have started to go through this process, very short and brief. And the loans are coming through in a matter of days, if not within a day. So this scheme is certainly one where the government are pushing through the cash to get to businesses exceptionally quickly. It was launched only recently on the 4th of May. However, the statistics are quite staggering, which we'll get onto later, as the amount of loans that have been made already under this scheme. As I said earlier, it's the lower of 25% turnover or 50,000, which is the top cap. The headline benefit of the Bounceback loan scheme, when compared to the other loan schemes that have been available prior to its inception, is the flat rate of 2.5% of interest, which is superior to the rates of interest that I've heard from clients who've tried to gain loans under the business interruption loan scheme, where interest rates have been double figures in cases. Repayment terms are fixed at 6 years. However, you can early repay, just as you can with the existing schemes. In this case, lenders are not permitted to ask for any personal guarantees whatsoever under the scheme, but the borrowers obviously do remain liable to pay the loan in full, despite the government guarantee. There is sometimes out there a misinterpretation of what 100% government guarantee means. It doesn't mean that the company isn't required to pay back the loan. It just means that should they default and go into administration or liquidation, that the government will step in to assist the lender. Now, I'm going to go on to the comparison with the existing scheme, especially not necessarily the large scheme, but the CBILS, the business interruption loan scheme proper, which has been used for medium-sized businesses up until the Bounceback loan scheme's inception. To give some statistics, in the week to the 6th of May, the CBILS for small and medium-sized enterprises, £1.4 billion of the loans were accessed in that week to 6th of May. Now, the Bounceback loan scheme, which came in on the 4th of May, there was £2 billion worth of approved loans within the first 24 hours, with anecdotally cash coming into businesses within 2 to 3 days thereafter. There's 69,000 loans approved in the first day. So clearly it's been immensely popular and more popular than the original business interruption loan scheme. In many regards, that seems to be a smart idea. If you are only looking for up to £50,000, if you require greater sums than £50,000, obviously you need to look to the interruption loan scheme. But for figures up to £50,000, both the process is simpler, the speed of access to finance is quicker, the interest rates are almost certainly lower, and the requirement to provide viability studies, etc., which have been required for the business interruption loan scheme, are far less or non-existent in the Bounceback scheme's requirements. It therefore makes a lot of sense for companies to utilise the Bounceback scheme over the business interruption loan scheme if they're at that lower end of the financing requirements. One of the good pieces of good news is that if you were successful in being able to take out a business interruption loan scheme loan already, and you have the cash and are concerned that you now are lumbered with a loan which has a higher interest rate when it falls due than were you be able to wait until the Bounceback scheme came into existence, you can refinance your CBILS loan, so long as it's below £50,000, with a Bounceback loan. You can't take out loans under both schemes, but you can refinance an existing business interruption loan with a Bounceback loan, and therefore take advantage of the superior, the likely to be superior interest rate that you will be able to access via the Bounceback loan scheme. So it seems to me that a lot of businesses are making a smart decision in taking out Bounceback loans rather than the SME's version of the CBILS now, and hopefully businesses will also take advantage of refinancing when they are capable, or where they are capable of doing so. Okay, that covers off the CBILS and the Bounceback loan scheme. I'm now going to pass over to my colleague Tim Cook, who will be starting off discussing the Future Fund.
Good afternoon, everyone. The Future Fund is a new fund introduced by the government, which is really there to support businesses that already are making claims for research and development and are innovative companies, pretty young, but they have previously raised money. It was launched in May 2020, and it's designed to help these high growth companies in the UK receive the investment they need. Relevant to many angel and VC funded startups, e.g. the fintechs. These are probably unable to access any kind of monies under the business interruption schemes because they typically rely on equity investment rather than pre-revenue, pre-profit. This one's going to be administered by the British Business Bank rather than the high street banks, or in fact the government. So it's another separate entity, again spreading the workload. Provides UK companies with convertible loans of between £125,000 and £5 million. Importantly, it's on a matched basis, so the company needs to be able to raise funds from outside third-party private investors, and then under this particular scheme, potentially they will be able to get a matching sum of money from the British Business Bank. It initially opens at the end of September, and claims will be able to be made thereafter. So let's look at some of the eligibility criteria. So first of all, it's got to be a UK registered company, which mustn't be listed on a stock exchange. So that's not just the main exchange, that's also the AIM exchange as well. You need to have already raised funds in equity investment from third-party investors historically in a period up to 5 years before the current date. If you haven't, then unfortunately you're not going to get off the starting blocks. You've got to be able to attract, as I mentioned earlier, matching funding from private investors or institutions. And further details on the eligibility criteria on operation will be published in due course. But the important thing to bear in mind is that you have to be able to attract money from private people, as well as then applying to the British Business Bank for funding on an absolutely equal matched basis. So we're expecting it's a £750 million package through Innovate UK. As you can see, there's additional support will be provided for customers up to £550 million, and grants and loans will be immediately available to 2,500 customers who opt in, totaling 200 million. And Innovate UK will also extend 175 million per firm, around 1,200 who are not in receipt of any current funding from Innovate UK. So it's a very useful package for these young businesses who are in this space of R&D and the fintechs, etc. We're now going to look at the top-up funding for co-working companies. And again, as you can see, it's an extra £617 million in funding to be distributed for those not eligible for business rate relief. Not every company is entitled to relief for the business rates. This is being administered by the local councils, and funding is aimed at small businesses with ongoing fixed property related costs, such as serviced offices and other types of tenancies. As I said earlier, it's local authorities who are going to be administering this fund, and they're going to allocate the money at their discretion. Businesses must be small, with less than 50 employees, and must demonstrate a significant drop in income due to the coronavirus pandemic. Maximum grant anyone can obtain is £25,000, and there are also grants of £10,000 and under £10,000. What's really important here is this is for targeted businesses, and payments are to be made to other businesses based on local economic need. So it's designed for co-working spaces, e.g. regular market traders, small charities. They won't meet the small business relief rates, etc. Bed and breakfasts that pay council tax. But it's really, can your business emphasise to the local government that they are an important and integral part of your local area, providing particular services to the local business community, to the local individuals, etc. And therefore you warrant a payment being made to you under this scheme. Let's look at some figures. So as of 27th of April, over 614,000 business properties received grants totaling £7.5 billion via the SBGF and the RHLGF schemes. This represents more than 61% of local authorities' allocated funding. So there is more money there to be had. You've got to make your case for it. And for you to get something that's material to your business, you really need to make sure that you stick out and shine to the local authority, and they understand your importance to the locale. Let's have a quick look at the self-employed income support scheme. Now, the portal opened on Monday, 13th May, for applications, and they received 110,000 claims before lunch. It's a pretty straightforward process for individuals. You need your unique taxpayer reference, your national insurance number, so that you can initially check whether you're eligible. A lot of people should already have been receiving letters from HM Revenue and Customs inviting them to check their eligibility for this scheme. And HMRC are trying to stagger the dates between the 13th and 18th of May when people can apply in order not to overload the system. Applicants are going to need their government gateway credentials and your correct bank details. The government gateway is extremely easy actually to obtain. You need to go on to Google Government Gateway and get yourself set up. It will happen fairly quickly, and therefore you can then go through and deal with this particular scenario. The way it's been structured at the moment is that unfortunately accountants cannot do this claim on behalf of their clients. It's not allowed. It requires the individual themselves to make the claim. So grants are payable in a single instalment. It's a taxable grant of 80% of the average trading profits up to £7,500, which is akin to the amounts being paid under the job retention scheme of £2,500 maximum per month. The payments are likely to take 6 working days to get into your bank accounts, and the application process shows how HMRC has calculated the grant due. You need simply to check either with your accountant, or if you can see yourself, that the 3 sets of profit figures that they have taken into account are indeed the correct amounts. Sadly, if anyone's made a loss is counted as a negative figure and not counted as a 0. So let's move on to the next slide. Ooh, questions.
Okay, hi Tim. We've had one question come through on the Q&A page, which is from Mike Billingsley. Which is, hi, is the Future Fund actually already launched? When I go to the government website, it says it's not open yet. My understanding is that it's due to open in May.
Yeah, at the end of the month, it's due to come online. There will be further announcements about it. At the moment, it's pretty skeleton type things. They're only, the document that gives you the main listing is actually headed headline terms, and that's it. So it is coming out in that fashion at the moment. It's very much watch this space. Information is coming out almost daily on various additions to the various government schemes, and the Future Fund will be the one to look out for.
From questions we had come through in advance, I have one for you, Tim, which is that our company does not make any profit as we're at the development stage and we've not commercialised our product yet. Can we still benefit from the Future Fund?
Yeah, that's not a problem. It's a good question, and it's really there. Nothing to do with profits, nothing to do with turnover levels. It's all about, can the company itself raise money from third-party investors, and have they raised money from third-party investors of at least £250,000 in the last 5 years. Having done that, if it's a private UK registered company, then it should be able to benefit from the government offer, so long as they can actually find an investor to come alongside the government and effectively share that investment into the company.
So I guess more scale-ups than absolute startups.
Correct.
I had one question that came in in my direction, which is, what checks will my bank perform prior to making a decision to lend under the Bounceback loan scheme? Now, the Bounceback loan scheme is designed to cut through a lot of the red tape that I think was preventing lending under the COVID Business Interruption Loan scheme. It's designed to be fast and flexible, and therefore to relax the instructions that lenders must follow. The instructions are that the borrower is required to self-declare that they meet the eligibility criteria for the scheme, and the lenders don't need to assess the business's affordability or viability. So it is quite straightforward. Lenders aren't responsible for the borrower's decision to borrow, and different lenders will have different verification levels, but we understand from those who've tried the process that it's relatively straightforward and funds are received pretty swiftly. Another question for you, Tim, which is as a private investor, I would normally be looking for EIS tax relief on investments into startups or high-risk companies. If I match fund a company which is raising funds under the Future Fund, will this impact on my EIS tax relief?
It won't actually impact on your historical EIS relief, if you had any historical relief, but the amount that you are now potentially making available to the company is being made available as a loan, not as an equity investment, and therefore it will not qualify under the EIS relief scheme because it is not an equity investment. There may be further details on this later on, but that's certainly the current position. Potentially there is the ability to convert that loan at the end of the period, which is set at 3 years maximum at the moment. We don't know whether that will enable you to qualify for EIS at this second in time. Normally it wouldn't, because making a loan and then having that converted to equity is precluded under EIS. So I wouldn't go into this on the basis I'm going to get EIS relief. If it turns out when the legislation becomes more available that that's the case, then great. I would go into this on the basis that I'm lending money as a loan to a business, and it's going to be matched by money coming in from the government.
On another topic covered by you, Tim, on the serviced office and co-working spaces. So we operate a small business out of a shared office space and have to contribute a service charge in addition to our rent. The service charge covers electricity, etc. Would we qualify for a grant?
So the theory goes, yes, you should be able to get a grant as far as that's concerned. It's just a question of making yourself visible to the local authority. And on the basis of the current guidelines available, the government introduced this top-up loan scheme, for businesses like yours in mind. And as long as you can demonstrate that your business has ongoing property-related costs, and that importantly you've suffered a drop in your income because of COVID, then you should be able to qualify for some level of grant. And as I keep emphasising, it's the local authorities here, not central government, that are handling this, and it's at their discretion to extend the grant funds rather than necessarily you can have a set sum of money. So it's important that you make your application to the local authority and you make it clear you've had a drop in income and that you are a valuable business to the local area.
It's Robert here. Can I also just add something to that? Agree entirely with what Tim has just been saying. I've also, speaking to some of my clients, just had some direct feedback on that, where we have advised them to get in touch directly with their local authority, and they are certainly responding at this stage, but I think it's still a little bit early days in terms of have the discretion to determine how to distribute this additional funding. So it will be available, and I think it's obviously aimed to catch small businesses, as Tim said, where they maybe don't pay business rates and therefore don't fall under the scheme to get a grant for that, but have been directly affected by the outbreak. So I think just the experience that I've heard back from some of my clients, that it's it is still early days, but the funding is available, and it's just each local authority is obviously just determining how best to distribute that funding based on the local economic needs.
Rob, we've had a question for you in the chat from Russell. He works for a German company. To paraphrase, he works for a German company in the UK. The company hasn't got a UK bank account, so he understands that he's not eligible for furlough. Is this the case?
Yeah, unfortunately, that is the case. One of the eligibility criteria is that the employer must have a UK bank account that can accept BACS payments. Now, there may be an opportunity to get a bank account open to accept furloughed grants, but the portal will effectively reject any claim unless that information can be provided.
Another question for you, Tim, relating to the Future Fund. Will my company be able to use funds raised to repay existing bank loans?
So this is not really what the Future Fund is designed to do at all. It's designed to provide further money for working capital and not to pay off loans that already exist, etc. So it's very important that you look at it from that perspective. It's really there to help you carry on doing what you're doing rather than to deal with your historical debts from that perspective.
Okay, we've got another question. This is kind of, I suppose, to all of us, but as a tax man at heart, probably yourself, Tim, what are your predictions for tax rates next year?
Well, don't hold your breath, because they're going to have to get some of this money back at some point in time. And I would expect them to be looking to try to find ways to claw back some of the money. How quickly they will do it is a different kettle of fish, but certainly I think you find that you're going to see rates moving upwards in order that they can actually claw back all the money that they've been pouring into the economy to try to prevent it from collapsing.
Do you think that'll be more corporate taxes or personal taxes?
I suspect that they will attempt to do a bit of both, to be honest with you. I suspect that they may well, although it's a political hotball, they may well increase the basic rate by a penny or two, and they may well increase the corporate tax rate by a penny or two, because those are the two main sets of taxes that actually come into the exchequer. The other one that's a little bit more indiscriminate, of course, is if they change the VAT rate, which they've always promised they wouldn't do. But that's a bit more indiscriminate and hits at everyone across the market. But you're likely to see taxes being raised in order to repay some of these funds that they have laid out. Quite where they're going to go with it, we don't know, but that's my personal feeling as to what's going on.
Well, that's all the questions that we have. I'd like to thank my colleagues Robert Bradman and Tim Cook, and I'll send my thanks to all of you who have been listening to this webinar, whether live or on a future recording. Feel free to contact us, either your client partner if you are a client, or info@Wilderco, or the number on screen now if not. I'm sure we can help and assist you through whatever it is that you need advice on relating to the reliefs available to you currently provided by the government. Thank you very much.